I did it again. My mic is muted. How many times have I started Red May with uh, those under those conditions? Well, I'll start again. Welcome to Red May, and it's your 1 month vacation from capitalism, as you probably know if you're here. And today's discussion is, well, we hope it's the beginning of a Red May news program every year called Red May News Jam. We're picking one topic to follow, and of course, the logical one to pick right now at this conjuncture, at this moment in the US, is 1, 2, 3, many Columbias. The incredible proliferation of both encampments and uh, protest movements on the campus, graduation ceremonies stopped, faculty solidarity, uh, intervention from off the campus by counter protesters, violent counter protesters. A lot is going on. And as we watch it from our living rooms or on TV, we would like to hear more from people who are much closer to the event than we are. So I would like to introduce some of the people who are here, or to say even that the events are so moment to moment that some of the people who are coming here had to drop off at the last minute. Sarah Mason, for example, is the steward of her union at UC Santa Cruz, and they just voted to strike in a solidarity strike. So she's got to do organizing work. Danielle Carr found herself in a similar situation, but fortunately, all the other people have showed up. So let's move. I think a first person I'll introduce is Christopher Geary from UC Berkeley. He's a grad student in English, writing on the history of aesthetics. What's going on at Berkeley? It's always a good place to start. For us from the 60s, Berkeley is an inspiration and always was on the East Coast. So fill us in.
Sure. Yeah, and pleasure to be here, a part of Red May, been tuning in pretty regularly for a few years. Yeah, so what's going on at Berkeley? I mean, both a lot and no longer much is the kind of the long and the short of it. So we had a really big encampment here starting on April 23rd that finally dismantled on May 15th. That was on Wednesday. Our encampment was really big. It was right on top of the Mario Savio steps on Sproul Plaza, right in the middle of campus. So it's a highly symbolic location. We ultimately had about well over 100 tents there, and dozens and dozens and dozens of people regularly camping out there for over 3 weeks. But basically over the weekend, the sort of main encampment organizers have been negotiating with our campus administration, and they agreed to a deal with the campus administration that required them to dismantle the camp by Wednesday morning. The deal entailed a statement condemning the violence against Palestinians in Gaza, but not a condemnation of genocide or anything like that. And then also a kind of basically a dead-end task force to explore some industry-specific divestments from surveillance technologies, weapons manufacturers, and the prison industrial complex. But it's a non-binding commitment to explore the possibility of divesting from those industries. And not many people expect that to bear any fruit. The larger kind of context, which Philip also alluded to, is that simultaneously across the UC system now, the union representing graduate workers and postdocs has now authorized a strike. Our strike vote was open Monday to Wednesday, and it sort of passed by a really wide margin. And then just today, our leadership announced that UC Santa Cruz is going to be the first to go out on strike starting on Monday. So there was a lot of acrimony and tension around the end of our encampment, particularly on the eve of a political strike for Palestine that was going to be taken up across the whole system, and entering a whole new phase of really serious economic disruption. And I can say a little bit more about, I think, some of the problems and errors and just factors, I guess, that led to this unfortunate situation where
Please do.
Berkeley is basically got taken out of the running for this coming strike. But yeah, that's the sort of situation on the ground. One other thing I should say is that things did immediately then heat up yesterday again. So on Wednesday, a group of kind of disgruntled encampment folks who were very unhappy with the deal occupied a building in central Berkeley. It's right next to People's Park, which has been a long time site of popular agitation and protest, and it's like in a way an active occupation for many years against the UC's plans to redevelop it. If any of you know, actually, I mean, the whole park has been sealed off with 2 stories of shipping containers by the UC for the last few months as a way to sort of evict the community that had been living there. And so this building occupation right next to People's Park started on Wednesday. The building itself was, it was a condemned building, not being actively used by the UC, but is owned by UC Berkeley. And they held it down for over 24 hours. But then yesterday evening, UC Berkeley called in over 100 riot police, UCPD, Berkeley PD, Oakland PD, and then a lot of California Highway Patrol folks as well. And they raided the house and arrested everyone inside. There was a big community mobilization to oppose the arrests, and for a couple of hours we prevented them extracting the prisoners, but ultimately they got taken to the county jail. So tensions are still high and things might still pop off, but UC Berkeley does not have an encampment anymore, unfortunately. You're muted, Philip.
I did it again. Let's bring everyone else in the discussion. I'll quickly introduce people because they may have some questions. I have some for Chris too. Shall we, Mahim, shall we put everybody on screen, I think? Good. So we do have with us Rebecca Karl, who's professor of history at NYU, author of China's Revolution in the Modern World, Revolutions, Mao Zedong in China in the 20th Century World, The Magic of Concepts, History and the Economic in 20th Century China, and many more books. We have Josh DeWind. Maga's here, great. Okay, so we have Josh DeWind, who is an anthropologist and a comrade of mine in 1968 at Columbia, where buildings were also taken over. And we have Miranda Alcazar, or Maga, the good Maga rather than the bad Maga, who is a postdoc at UCLA. Years ago was working on a dissertation on Latina immigrant on domestic work in Los Angeles. Is very interesting. Interviewed Mike Davis for us. So we just heard Chris Geary on talking about what's going on at Berkeley, and where they've just concluded a deal where some people were disgruntled and some were not. How how would you describe the various groups or factions that formed part of the Alliance for the Encampments? The Jewish Voice for Peace, and what are the ones who are essentially making the policy and on the committee over at Berkeley?
Yeah, so at Berkeley, there, a lot of, groups have been involved in the UCB Divest Coalition that formed back in April. But really in the driver's seat this whole time has been our local SJP chapter. So it's Graduate Students for Justice in Palestine. And, they've been the ones kind of, leading the charge. For several months, they've been organizing Palestine solidarity actions on our campus before the encampment started. And they were the lead organizers for the encampment itself, and also they constituted the negotiating team with the campus administration. Beyond them, like the constituency of the camp, it was a lot of graduate students, a ton of undergrads, and also community members too. There were different political tendencies, for sure. A lot of us graduate students were a lot of us are militant trade unionists, and are much more kind of like keyed in and focus on direct economic disruption rather than more sort of symbolic actions. There are a lot of people who are being politicized for the very first time, especially among the undergrad population, and among sort of like broader community activists, there are a lot of really committed anarchists, or and also autonomists, but people who have a ton of experience with popular movements and occupations like these. There is a kind of like deep well of kind of not so much institutional, but like I think popular knowledge here in the East Bay for these kinds of actions, like especially going back to the occupations in the early 2010s here.
What, Rebecca, you have a question? Yeah. Oh, no.
I was just sorry, Philip, I was just going to add there, just to build off of what Chris is saying there, is that these solidarities came together really quickly. And without, at least at NYU, we came together really, really quickly without a moment to really think through what our political, we had a reactive mode that was urgent and in the moment, and has been continually urgent and in the moment. And so the time for a reflection on, other than very basic principles of solidarity and unity around certain very basic things, are the political discussions that would have clarified factions and various tendencies and so on and so forth never actually occurred. And so at NYU, we actually just had a meeting today. Our faculty for justice and faculty and staff for justice in Palestine. And one of the things that we committed to doing over the course of the summer is trying to think about what those political commitments in a deeper sense actually are. Because as Chris mentions, a lot of people came together with a lot of different sort of investments in the movement, although all unitable under the urgency of the genocide and of the moment. And so it's been actually clarifying now to think through, as we've horrifically moved into the 7th and 8th month of this absolutely horrendous ongoing moment of slaughter and of forced starvation and so on. It's been clarifying to think about the ways in which a politics emerges from this moment, from the very different kinds of streams that have constituted it. And the building of the encampments, the clearing, the sweeping of the encampments, the NYP in our case, and in New York, the NYPD on the campuses being brought in, and so on, have and then, most recently, the sanctions and punitive measures and punishments and all the other stuff that has, come up institutionally and so on against the students and the more vulnerable faculty have served to really wash away some of the dross and some of the stuff that might otherwise have inhibited a solidarity, but also have posed new questions for us. And these are not, so far at least for us, questions that have split any of us apart. Although I'm certain that within the encampment itself, amongst the students themselves, they had a very robust set of discussions amongst those who had been sent in as negotiators, and then the larger group of folks who held down the encampment during the very brief moment of negotiation that was possible. And I'm sure I know they had a very robust set of discussions. I was not. Those were the students, and the students did that. The faculty were not involved in that. So I wasn't involved in those discussions, and I know they were. The university gave them, half an hour to decide on something, and they didn't even have a decision-making process in place, so that they needed to first hash through the process and so on. All of which they were inventing in real time, and the university got really, really sick of waiting, and then just decided to shut the whole thing down. So I think these are ongoing discussions. And I think they're going to be clarifying discussions. They're going to be very, I'll have more I can have plenty more to say about that. But before we went live on this, Josh was talking about the kinds of splits that happened at Columbia, and so on in the aftermath of the Columbia occupations in '68 and so on. And I think these are clarifying moments, and I think we have yet to see, because the moment is still upon us in such an urgent way. I think we've yet to see what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, and in a certain way, it's kind of like a George Floyd event, but a George Floyd event that never stops, that just keeps going on, rather than happening at one moment that people react to and so forth. I mean, in terms of the galvanizing quality of it. We want to hear more eventually about the reaction from NYU, because there's some very bizarre things that are happening there. But perhaps UCLA is absolutely the most unique and horrifying and amazing. And maybe, Maga, you could start to describe, how the buildup to the counter protesters occurred. It wasn't just a one-day thing. It was like 5 days before the attack, right? With the administration doing nothing or something, right? Oh, let's get you.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha.
Thanks for having me. I really just, before I get started on talking more about the details at UCLA, I just want to say that what you all were talking about just now really resonates with, the moment we're in now, of what we've been describing at UCLA as like contingent solidarities, right? So we have our enemies and then our frenemies, and we're really trying to navigate and figure out how to move strategically in this moment in a way that maximizes our power to actually win divestment, and actually, make an impact on the ongoing genocide. So I really just want to say that resonated a lot with me. I guess I can talk a little bit about UCLA. I'm here, I guess, speaking for myself, but also as a member of a rank and file caucus at UCLA, rank and file for Democratic Union, which has been a member organization of the UC Divest Coalition. And on our campus, it was the UCLA Divest Coalition who were the sort of catalyst for our encampment. So our rank and file members at at UCLA have been a part of this encampment from the very beginning, and have, like you're saying, Phil, have defended and protected the encampment from Zionist mobs and from every manner of police and private security imaginable. And so, yeah, we're a little bit battle scarred, but we're very optimistic and at least very determined not to cower. So, yeah, I can talk a little bit about the encampment. Our encampment started on Thursday, April 25th. And this was a day after USC. So I actually had been at USC the first day of their encampment. And this is important because prior to the USC encampment, the only real encampment we had seen in California was at Humboldt, which was very militant and very inspiring, but a CSU, and one that was fairly isolated in a kind of more rural setting. So the USC encampment for us was a really big deal because it's, now bringing this fight to kind of a major city on the West Coast. The day when I arrived at USC, there were maybe 50 like undergraduates. I would say like primarily undergraduates. Didn't seem like they had like a real plan other than kind of like show up and try to defend the encampment and then mobilize like community members to support. The LAPD immediately descended on the campus in droves, and there was a de-arrest made that was really, really, really galvanizing. But it was sort of night and day from UCLA's encampment, which began the following day, right? At UCLA, I wasn't part of the people that arrived at 4 a.m, but there was a group that camped at 4 a.m. That were members of the UC Divest Coalition. By the time I arrived there in the morning, there was a barricade around the encampment. And the encampment, I should say, at UCLA is really symbolically important because it was in front of Royce Hall, which is one of the most photographed college campuses, like probably in the history of the planet, right? This is very iconic Hollywood image of what a university is. And like you're saying, right, immediately from the as soon as the encampment was established, there was a Zionist presence. It started off pretty small, maybe like 20, 30 Zionists. A lot of the tactics were like psychological warfare. So really they would wait until people who weren't camping overnight at the encampment left, and then would like terrorize students who were camping overnight, like not allowing them to sleep, playing loud music and throwing flashbang grenades and just making a lot of disruptive noise. On Sunday after the encampment, the kind of leftist networks in the city got word that there was a large Zionist demonstration, and the Palestinian Youth Movement mobilized folks to defend the encampment. And people thought like, that's it, right? Like the city's come out in droves and we've, beat back the Zionists. So on that following Monday, I went to go like finish writing my dissertation. I was like, okay, great. Like we did our job. The Zionists are gone. Monday was a little bit more quiet. There were 50 Zionists, but again, right, like the encampment kind of had this like defense down pat, and it was kind of clear to us, or it seemed to us, that they were just going to kind of get the hint that they weren't going to breach our barricades. That was obviously a mistake. On April 30th, the night of April 30th into the morning of May 1st, which the irony is not lost on me and shouldn't be lost on anyone, right? At 11 p.m., I was in Santa Barbara and someone said, like, turn on the live stream, the SJP live stream. And I turned it on and I witnessed something that in my like 15 years of organizing in California and New York and all over, like I had never seen before. And it was just an attack on these, like, the encampment was maybe 80% majority undergrad, so like 18 to 22-year-olds. These were like grown men, fascists essentially, who came in and were just like throwing flashbang grenades, really trying to broach the encampment. From 11 p.m. until 2 a.m. people bravely fought off the fascists, and there was no police in sight. We found out since then that our chancellor Jean Block was watching the whole thing for those 3 hours from inside a balcony at Royce Hall. And then I think after the third hour, when it was clear that, you know, they had beaten up protesters, 25 people ended up being hospitalized, again, primarily students, but maybe 20% of those being like workers, including a lot of our UAW 4811 members. Then they brought in the police, and then the morning after announced that that the encampment was a threat to public safety and would need to be disbanded. And that's when I came right from Santa Barbara with all these. Someone described it as a shield making factory, right? So we there was a huge outpouring of support from community members. We brought supplies that the encampment requested. There was a medic tent that was very well supplied. The kitchen committee was very well supplied. And even though that night the police breached the encampment multiple times, there was a sense of like, we're not leaving, you don't scare it. People started chanting, we're not leaving, you don't scare us, and we take care of us. So by the time that the encampment was actually disbanded, people had been there since at least 6 p.m., which is when the university had told us that the police were going to come in. CHP, which is under the jurisdiction of the governor, came in, the LA sheriffs, which is the county, LAPD, all manner of private security. And people fought and tried to hold the encampment for as long as possible until it was disbanded around 3 a.m. And then even then, right, it didn't actually get disbanded until 5 a.m. So I have so many things to talk about. I know Chris is here with 4811 and can also speak to like kind of next steps after the encampment. But I think that the UCLA really catalyzed the sense that you may break up the encampment, but a sentiment of like, we're not leaving it's true also because we're the students and the workers and the faculty who run the university, right? So I could talk forever, but I don't know if you had other questions or comments.
Yeah, I mean, my one comment is that in the University of Virginia, they called out the police to take the encampment away, but they didn't call as a danger. They never called the police to come in where neo-Nazis walked across the campus with torches shouting, "Jews will not replace us." Evidently, that's not a wave of anti-Semitism or something. Anyway, I mean, it's crazy. And of course, you wonder whether there'll be any consequences for the. It also reminds you of Trump watching January 6th, and everybody's saying, you know, stop this thing. And, you know, Block was doing the same thing. And
Yeah.
whether or not
No.
Yeah.
No, you raise a really important point about the sanctioning of fascist mob violence on our campus. And I mentioned the thing about the governor too, right? Because we're not in a Republican red state. We're in California. We're in a blue state. This is very much the policy that's coming straight from the top, right? And through all the levels of government. But you bring up a really good point that I omitted about so what happened the night of the mob. The only reason the fascist mob was disbanded is because eventually at 2 a.m, LAPD showed up, and when they showed up, they just peacefully allowed the mob to disperse. CNN just recently did a story. Interestingly, I think because there's been like a lot of grassroots kind of like abolitionist anti-police work being done to identify the individuals who were involved in the mob, but they were just allowed to kind of peacefully disperse. We did the following day, and no charges that we know of have been brought against any of them. They still hung out even the following night at the encampment. For example, for folks in the encampment, if you were trying to leave the encampment, one of the things that we were hearing were that Proud Boys, neo-Nazis, and Zionists were all kind of working together, like hovering around the parking lots, so that people leaving the encampment, kind of having just faced police violence and repression, might be like beaten up by Proud Boys, Nazis, and Zionists. And there's been, that we know of, besides the kind of CNN expose, there's been no effort to identify who the perpetrators were, or to, you know, like you're saying, right, there's this kind of huge double standard when it comes to fascist violence.
Well, what this shows so very clearly, and this is true at NYU, it's true everywhere, and UCLA showed this like seriously, because you know people like Gavin McInnes were allowed to go onto the Columbia campus, you know, the Proud Boys leader, and you know with his you know goons were actually let into a campus on lockdown to go walk around the encampment. What we know to be true, and yet the media refuses to actually, you know, report on, is that this isn't actually about anti-Semitism at all. And I'm not saying that anti-Semitism doesn't exist; it certainly does. But the crackdown on these encampments, the unsafeness of people and so on, how people are feeling unsafe, is not because of anti-Semitism. It's because of right-wing goons, and of who are in fact anti-Semitic, but who are left to roam free. And it's because of cops on campus, and cops who are being unleashed in ways that are just, I suppose it's both surprising and shocking. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised in this day and age, but it was still quite surprising here at NYU, and then to watch things unfold across the nation, in UCLA, Berkeley, and so on. But the you know, we had thought that post 68, that the sort of accommodations that universities, and certainly post Kent State, that the accommodations that universities had made to think about how and when to bring cops onto campus, we thought that still held. And what's quite clear is that it has, that all of those rule books are being torn up. All of that regulatory regime that we thought actually held has been completely ditched. And we are in, you know, we've been working now in a world where our university administrators make up rules that, minute by minute, second by second, that serve their purposes of securitization and so on, and that have nothing to do with actually what's happening. And so anti-Semitism has been waved around a lot, and yet what has become quite clear is that the real anti-Semites are being left to parade around untouched and undisciplined, whereas the rest of us who are trying to protest genocide in Palestine are being vilified.
Yeah, we'll get back to that because that's really important. But two factors that, one is, like you say, every rule that's been negotiated as to when to call the police or so forth has been ignored by administrations and presidents. Perhaps the most comic version of it was, I read today in Barnard that the gender and sexuality feminism department had put up a solidarity with Palestine notice from the faculty on their website, which was not illegal. You were not, the rules which had been negotiated said that you can't take a position during a political campaign, but people are allowed to post things like that. The administration took it down, but then they rewrote the law and made it retroactive to before they put it up. it's blatant stuff like that.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in if that's okay, just to
Yeah.
piggyback off what Rebecca was saying. At the UCLA encampment that evening, I would actually take it a step further, right? It's not just that there's like sanctioning of like right-wing anti-Semitic violence, but on that night of the kind of 48 hours, one of the kind of popular chants here in LA is LAPD, KKK, IDF, they're all the same. Where I've chanted that in the past, and that was those 48 hours showed us that like that chant is real, right? Like the IDF, ex-IDF, IDF soldiers, and like wannabe IDF that showed up on that first night were fully sanctioned by the LAPD, and vice versa, right? The LAPD allowed the KKK and the IDF to kind of just roam freely. So I would say that part of what those 48 hours showed us is like the masks are off, right? We have these universities that are these like idealized places of like civility and of free speech and democracy. Like those 48 hours showed us so clearly that like that's just not the case. These are also violent, extremely fascist places, right, that will collaborate with the IDF and the KKK and LAPD and have been and fully will support that while demonizing their own students.
Yeah, well, I mean, the neoliberal, neoconservative university has been shown to be what it is, and now the ways in which private universities such as NYU are so completely in the pocket of our trustees and our billionaire donors and so on. This has just become, patently clear. I mean, we see the leaked transcripts that the Washington Post just published today of all of the business leaders in New York imploring Eric Adams, our mayor, to send in the NYPD and to clean up these campuses and so on. I mean, our campus was swept the second time. Was swept when the students had set up an encampment next to Paulson Hall, paid for by Paulson, one of the big, billionaire donors. And it was swept on the morning of the day at which Hillel was going to have a huge fundraiser there, where 4 big trustees and our president, the university president, were going to go. And the encampment clearly was a blight on this beautiful new building, which is actually an extraordinarily ugly new building, but nevertheless, it's a new building paid for by huge debt financing that, of course, is going to indebt our students into the future forever. And the camp was swept the morning at 6 a.m., the morning of the day of the big fundraiser, so that Paulson, and the other trustees could walk into a building that looked like it was, pristine and well kept and free of actual conflict ideas, thinking, or anything other than its shiny glass, facade. Yeah.
Let's go for a second and think about some differences between 68 and now. I mean, I guess that's an excuse to get Josh here in the conversation. To start off, I want to show a photo because you can see that some differences from the photo are right there. That's a photo. I don't know if you remember this, Josh, but you were there. You were about to talk after the guy who later became a LaRouche was talking. I'm over here among the rabble on the floor. But one of the things I notice is it's basically all white men in the photo. And one of the nice things about looking at the people who are taking part now is how much of it is led by people who aren't white men. So at least that is a wonderful progress. What do you see also when you not in this photo? We can take the photo away. I just wanted to surprise Josh with it, but yeah,
campuses.
yeah.
One of the things that I was reminded of it back at Columbia is that after the buildings were cleared by the police, it created a similar kind of dynamic where I guess there was shock at the violence, shock at the use of the police to clear out protests, and it drew the entire campus into dispute over what should have happened on the campus and what the role of the university should be when there are protests. See, it seems very similar to me. At Columbia, I guess we stayed focused on what our 7 demands. And I'm wondering, in all the talks that you've made about the 3 different campuses, you haven't mentioned your demands at all. And so I'm wondering what the relationship is between galvanizing a larger population through police violence or repression, and what the political goals are, and how those get united in a way that one of you was saying is I guess, or Rebecca, you were saying over the summer to have explorations about it to strengthen and grow the movement. What's going to happen? How are the demands going to become elaborated? Are they going to be increased? Are they going to respond to current conditions? What happens if Rafah's invaded? What happens after that with an Israeli occupation? How it's hard. You can't predict what's going to happen in Palestine or in Gaza or in Israel, but it's got to have some impact on the organizing and goals of organizing on campus. I'm sorry, that's a little bit vague, but there's a whole new dynamic that's been put in place by the police intervention. And I'm wondering how you use that as a way of increasing the strength of the protests. And in a way to make it not just about the university, we've been invaded, but the original goals, which is how do you stop the violence in Gaza? What do you do about Israel? How do you keep U.S. intervention from contributing to that violence?
Well, I mean, yeah, those are super important questions. And one of the things that we are thinking about now, I mean, one of the things that we did not know in October when all of this, started to unfold, and what we could not have predicted was the destruction of all of the universities and in Gaza, and the way in which learning, education, archives, libraries, a whole culture is being destroyed. And so one of the things that we've really tried to and that we are going to try to recenter as we move forward is the problem of scholasticide, the problem of what the role of the university is, our university, but universities in general is, and what the relationship between learning about Palestine in our universities is to the scholasticide and to keeping alive a culture that is and a set of learning and a set of issues that are political issues, cultural issues, educational issues, social issues, religious issues, and so on, that are that if Israel were to have its complete way, would be crushed underfoot and crushed to dust if they could. So we're trying to. This is one of the things that we're trying to think about how to. We have, of course, one of the things about the sending in the troops or the police and everything else. I mean, and defending encampments and so on, all of which have been very, very important for and so on. But what it has done is has diverted slightly the focus from Palestine and from Palestinian issues. And so one of the things we're wanting to do this summer is to think about ways in which to recenter those questions in concert with the questions of students' protests and the movements and so on and so forth. Chris, I see you want to get in, so I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very valuable framing or reframing, and I think that the central motivations for for all of us here and for the whole encampment movement is how can we stop the genocide that is happening right now, and how can we ultimately end the occupation that is itself genocidal. I do think though that while we always need to be centering that, we also need to be really, really clear-eyed about our own material conditions and connections to that genocide and to that occupation. And as university students and workers, it is our duty to specifically target and maximize the pressure against our own institutions' ties to the genocide and to the occupation. And the strategic conversations and debates and discussions, which get super, super heated, obviously, because it's a huge sort of group of people that's been activated by this. Those are they need to keep that kind of really material connection and the goal of severing it constantly in mind. And it is really, really tricky. And I know we were talking about how egregious the police repression of the encampment movement has been. And this is perhaps something that a lot of us who've been organizing in this movement and organizing for BDS need to maybe reflect on a little bit going forward too. But repression hasn't also, that's not been the only way that our institutions have responded, and we need to think really seriously and critically about the other way that universities have responded, which is how they responded at my campus, right? Which is through containment and pacification and neutralization. And we need to start to develop a counter strategy for that too. In a way, UC Berkeley and LA are the kind of night and day of the encampment movement. But there are lessons to be drawn from both. But yeah, and the whole UC system too. I mean, there's Riverside was pacified and settled. Berkeley was now. Maybe there will be others, but there have been also pretty egregious sweeps. LA, San Diego, really recently UC Irvine and UC San Francisco. There are still really big encampments elsewhere, particularly at Davis is really, really big now. So I mean, it's all to play for, and there's also then too the kind of added angle now of the at least within the UC system of our strike too. And I think one reason why, for instance, our campus administration was able to contain our encampment, because amidst all the kind of wrangling and strategizing, I do think there was a failure to kind of have a more clear-eyed analysis of the sort of political terrain in which we're in and our sort of material conditions as workers. And so there was a kind of failure to kind of synchronize up the encampment tactic and the strike weapon as well. And I, personally, I've been organizing for the last 2 weeks to try to get my coworkers strike ready, and we just we didn't get the call. We missed our grading deadline. There's not going to be a serious strike at Berkeley, and it's really heartbreaking because this fight is so important. But I know there are a lot of lessons to learn too, not just from the repressive tactics of our universities, but also the pacifying ones as well. And how they can, I don't know. I think one important lesson that I've been drawing is that part of the pacification has also entailed the isolation of the encampment and the encampment movement from the broader push for divestment and to end the genocide. So, sorry, it was a bit of a feelings dump there. I'm sorry.
No, it's helpful.
No, I think it's helpful to think about how these, because we've been working at warp speed, we too did not get together well enough a grade strike, which our graduate students wanted us to implement, and we could not get it together quickly enough to really do anything for the end of the semester. We've proceeded to votes of no confidence in our president, which are at most symbolic because the trustees love her and will keep her so long as they can. So what I'm saying is one of the things we're going to use the summer for is to become less reactive and more proactive, is to try to think of ways to become more proactive about our move, rather than with a clear focus on the demands, divestment, no cops on campus, academic boycott, NYU out of Tel Aviv, those sorts of things and so on. These are very clear demands that we have and that we will continue to press. But I think that we're going to try to become, one of the things we're trying to think about is how to become more proactive about this, rather than being constantly on the back foot, trying to react to the pressures. That are, as you say, Chris, I totally agree, that are both passive and active on part of the institution.
I see a parallel, and I wonder if it's useful or part of your thinking, which is the wiping out of the encampments and the repression of the protests leads to a disempowerment of the notion, or disempowerment of faculty and students in particular. And leads to a recognition, I guess, that there's a corporate power in the administration and the board who seem to be able to call in the repression. So maybe this is frame it as a repression of self-determination by the community of faculty and students. Similarly, in Gaza, what you described, Rebecca, about the cultural destruction of the universities and other institutions is a destruction of the possibility for social, political, and economic self-determination in Gaza. And I'm wondering if
it's the destruction of a future.
Of the future, yes. So self-determination becomes thwarted on the part for Palestinians. So is it possible that the thwarting of self-determination of the faculty and students will be seen as a way of supporting the self-determination of Palestinians? And in which case, does that change the demands of this movement from being one of stopping genocide or stopping human rights abuses to actually promoting self-determination, statehood? Does it draw into a whole, raising at a political level of what the demands are to supporting a much broader and perhaps more, broader than just trying to stop genocide, which is of course significant, but promoting self-determination for Palestinians and statehood is a whole nother level of political complexity, difficulty. And I'm wondering whether the university students who have faced repression would be sympathetic more to raising the nature of their demands to a broader political agenda.
I want to speak to the demands question, if I can. Yeah. I'd like to speak to the demands question. I think that, at least for UCLA, it wasn't the case necessarily. I would just say it's maybe an exception in the sense that the shutting down of the encampment hasn't been equaled like a shutting down of the energies of folks on campus. I think part of the kind of, then this is related to the kind of this demands question and this pacification question, that I don't know how familiar people are with the structure of our union, but we have a leadership that is rather conservative relative to the rank and file. And there's a long tinge of anti-democracy. And so one of the things about one of the fights that we've had to make with our union leadership has been precisely around the demands question, right? And around the strategy of the demands, because the demands, can be, the demands are sort of an abstract ideal, right? That we would want, and a horizon, but they also are a worldview and the way that we think about what the struggle is. And immediately, when our union leadership called the strike authorization vote, part of their language has been about using the strike as a way to de-escalate, as a way for the university to de-escalate. So their demands are far more limited than the demands of, let's say, Students for Justice in Palestine, even FJP. Honestly, they're even more conservative than than a lot of our faculty, and certainly more conservative than a lot of the militants in the rank and file. Part of the fight that we've been making is, that the demands need to be emerging from the movement, that they can't just be sort of unilaterally decided. And I think at UCLA, part of it is that we've been doing this like very long-term building with SJP, political education, kind of like how, like when you're talking, Josh, about like, how do we talk about Palestinian statehood? That's not a question that organically necessarily is going to spring up from the incumbents, but it's like this kind of deeper political work to do political education. And so the demands and the kind of strategy behind the demands, we've also needed to articulate a kind of counter demands. So rank and file members at UCLA have sort of been doing these popular assemblies where we've been bringing in input. And one of the main things that has one of the main expanded demands that we've added, right, that is not included in our union leadership's demands, is the idea of cops off campus, which our union leadership, for whatever reasons of politics and probably like some deal that they cut with the Democratic Party, will never say cops off campus for whatever reason. But that doesn't mean that that's not something that we are fighting for. So when we are organizing to go on strike, these are demands that are coming from Students for Justice in Palestine, from Black students that have been organizing on our campus, and from a lot of the militants in the rank and file, especially the ones who were assaulted essentially and treated extremely violently by the police. So we have these kind of two parallel demands. We have the expanded demands and also a parallel vision, that our vision isn't to use the strike and the demands as a way to de-escalate, that we're actually we have a different horizon than the kind of leadership and which represents kind of the political establishment of kind of the labor movement.
Let me kind of broaden the discussion and try to deal with issues that your actions all over the country are raising. The question that the press is never asking, but which is implied by every act that is taken, is why did the divestment movement against South Africa not produce this kind of resistance and repressive response as it is doing now in America to an extraordinary degree? Essentially, even under the conservative Reagan, there was grousing about it. There was arguing that South Africa was the only democracy in Africa or whatever. But literally, it was allowed to happen. It was not chased off of universities and so forth. So that's the question that the press has to ask Americans to ask. Why is this such a big thing, that the same thing that was done successfully, it had a successful ending, even though at the time the South Africans were saying, if we don't have apartheid, the blacks will exterminate us if literally it's taken away. But what we discover is that if you take away that state structure, that noxious state structure, and put in another one, you could have a state where blacks and whites could live together, as could happen at some point in the future in Israel. Because the truth is, they have fucked themselves out of a two-state solution by letting the settlers essentially occupy so much of the West Bank that you can never almost undo that. And the only thing left for given the demographic equality of about 7 million apiece, would be a secular state. How you get there, how many stages, one doesn't know. And it's certainly not for me or any of us to choose how it's done. But what we have to do is we've unveiled this third rail in American politics, this absolute sort of taboo, the except for Palestine taboo, which is blatantly large now at the moment. And that has to be pursued by this movement. The press has to be forced to deal with it because the immediate action is going to be a huge effect on American politics, and not for the first time. What will happen simply is that the moment Biden used that phrase, a ferocious wave of anti-Semitism, what he's implying is that all those students, including the half that are Jewish, who are part of the Jewish League for Peace, are anti-Semites, are being driven by anti-Semitism, which is an absolute disgusting thing to imply about people. It can it can interfere with their job prospects and so forth. But more importantly, in the immediate political future, nobody who's been called an anti-Semite by the president is going to vote for him. He is going to lose to whoever runs. I predict it. I will place bets on that. And immediately, when all that happens, the usual voices will come out and say, oh, it's all the young people's fault that we get Trump or whatever, as opposed to the people who made these horrible choices to take this plan. And it's not the first time it's happened, by the way, because not to get into assassination conspiracy stuff, which is not, the reason Sirhan said he was a Palestinian, and the reason he said he shot Robert Kennedy was because Kennedy had shepherded a bill to give F-16s to Israel a year before, and he did it on the anniversary of that. There was no big conspiracy.
Philip, I think you're getting us a little off track here.
God, I always do that, and
I'm gonna call us back onto track here. You're muted, Philip. You're muted.
Maybe we can talk about it. The effect that the larger effect on American politics that the movement is having, and that it has to pursue, because it's the only force at the moment that is talking about these things that are going to be crucial, that are eluded for whatever reason in the U.S. So
well,
I'll leave that.
This is the cause. This is my. I'm usually like a fundamental pessimist, and so I don't want to get into what the electoral politics of this look like, because I think that it doesn't matter. About Biden. Yeah, there's going to be a difference, but whatever. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. What I think that this movement has done for the first time, unprecedentedly and differently than happened for the South Africa thing, which was my coming into political, consciousness, was the South Africa divestment. That was my generation, my college generation of political activism. But what I think has happened is that the Palestine exception to free speech has now taken a central position. I mean, you can no longer not talk about Palestine. And I think that the signal, success of this last 7-8 months has been to center Palestine in our thinking about the modern world and our contemporary world in a way that should give us an opportunity. Another thing that we were thinking about for our summer, sort of homework, as it were, as faculty, was to think about centering Palestine where it becomes a paradigm or a framework through which to think our modern world. much in the way that, colonialism or gender studies or whatever else, And of course, the ferociousness of the attack on the encampments on the students is part of an ongoing attack on critical thinking, race theory, and so on and so forth. So that I think that the Palestinian question really does allow us to make these not only content connections, but the structural connections through which our universities are being assaulted and attacked, by legislatures, by trustees, by and so on. And of course, we, you guys are we're all in like sort of blue states. But they're coming after us too. Okay. And I'm president of the NYU AUP chapter here, and AUP has been very, very much involved in trying to hold the line on academic freedom and faculty governance, which is a slightly milder, sort of the more conservative end of, I personally am not conservative, but the more conservative end of what the movement solidarities looks like. So this is on the more, sort of the less, let's give into the demand and get back to academic freedom, sort of stuff. That's not my personal position, but that's been, sort of an AUP position. And I think that one of the things that we have to thwart is that idea that we had good universities and institutions before this, and that we just have to get back to that, and to think through the way in which this Palestine issue now has, as we were talking about before, has revealed all sorts of things about our universities, but also given us an opportunity to really, with Palestinian diaspora, with Palestinians in Palestine, with people all over the world, to think through what this means for our contemporary moment, and for a futurity that Israel is trying to snuff out quite deliberately. So I think that, without going back to Sirhan and all of that other, and so on, I think we can talk about the way in which Palestine really does now recenter a set of questions by completely taking away the Palestinian exception. That is, of course, going to still be, the forces of domination and oppression are still trying to make it impossible to speak about Palestine. But I think we've made it very clear that that's not going to work any longer.
Eloquently put.
Let me ask a question. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but or how it fits in. My impression is that the demands on all the campuses have been for divestment, and what, after the repression by the police, the issues about how universities are run, and the role of faculty will become enhanced and more difficult but will become a focus of a lot of the political organizing that takes place on campus, which is how do you protect your voices. In all that, the demands have been against or for the universities. Very little of the demands have been aimed at Biden and U.S. government policies. As far as I can tell, the demands haven't been, we have to stop Biden from sending more arms to Israel. And I'm wondering, is that because we don't want to make Biden a target because it will end up with Trump getting elected by disenchanting people about the Biden administration? Or is it just not seen as the most important issue? In 68, of course, the anti-war movement was all about U.S. government policies and war in Vietnam. And the student movement was equally involved in a national movement with marches on Washington and national protests. There's, as far as I know, been no call for a march on Washington to end U.S. policies towards Israel.
There was a march on Washington with 1.5 million people in it in November. I was there. There was a march on Washington, indeed, early on.
Then I'm totally ignorant. And is that going to continue, or will the politics continue to be preoccupied within the university, or will it become? Or is the goal to create more of a um, anti-government rather than anti-university stance?
Can I quickly jump in too? Yeah, I mean, I do think the encampment movement is the sort of part of the larger Palestine solidarity movement that's like really kicked into higher gear since the genocide in Gaza really intensified. But it's not the only one, and I think it's become the kind of like centerpiece in like media narratives, I think, for like mostly kind of reactionary reasons of like framing. So like diverting attention from Palestine to, you know, elite university spaces. And so I think that's a dynamic that we need to be really conscious of. But that also kind of obscures the larger, you know, the larger popular movement here. And, you know, I'm based in the East Bay, and like, you know, the ILWU here, which is the union at like the Port of Oakland, they have been doing like regular shutdowns, like preventing ships from moving arms to Israel. And like, these are the kinds of like larger kind of like organizing sort of movements that, you know, that you don't really read about, right? Everything is just, there's a real continuity with kind of, you know, elite hyperventilating about, you know, Zoomers, etc. I did want to circle back though to something that Philip raised about and Rebecca too, that you spoke to about the kind of the parallel and the precedent with the divestment movement against apartheid South Africa, because here at Berkeley, that's something that we've been like, you know, really thinking about a lot, and like really sort of like trying to learn from, but also think seriously about what's different in our moment. And that you know, the encampment tactic is like, you know, it's a direct quotation from the encampments that were set up at, you know, at Berkeley on Sproul Plaza on those very steps in like 1984 and 1985. And, you know, again, it led to an intense amount of police repression, like ultimately, like, you know, like almost 1,000 arrests in the whole UC system. But then in 1986, it did actually like win like over $3 billion of divestment from the UC system. One thing that we have been thinking really hard about, though, I've been on this sort of BDS research committee in our union here for the last like 6 months, and like one kind of qualitative shift that has happened is the intense financialization of university endowments, which has, you know, drastically increased how entangled they are with Israeli apartheid and genocide. But also, like, you know, really increase the opacity of those financial ties, and the sort of difficulty, because there are sort of layers of, you know, insulation from accountability now too. And in a way, like that kind of reckoning with that analysis also points us towards the fact that, like, you know, this can't just be, you know, a campus-based movement, or it can't just be like, you know, direct actions that will kind of, you know, hit a limit. Obviously, those are absolutely necessary, but there needs to be, you know, multiple prongs of escalation and disruption. And crucially, you know, one of the things that, you know, at least us as sort of rank and file militants in our union, we've been like kind of pressing and organizing for months, which is that, you know, there needs to be severe economic disruption through labor withholding, you know, on the model of what ILWU is doing. And, you know, we've seen some like the seeds of that, and it's finally coming into fruition a bit with this unprecedented system-wide political strike for Palestine. You know, and if we can pull this off, and there are a lot of counterforces militating against that, as Maga like already indicated, but if we can pull this off, this will set off a strike wave across the whole country. You know, so many more universities are unionized now, and then it'll go beyond even just, you know, university worker unions as well. I don't know and I think, you know, Josh, to go back to your question too, like, why has there not been like a kind of, you know, a direct call to arms against, you know, Biden or the Democrats? I think it's because we're also like, we're a little bit wiser. We have a lot more organizing experience now than we did in, like, you know, 2008 or whatever. Like, we're focused on the brass tacks and, you know, trying to build, like, you know, durable organizations that can start to, you know, severely economically disrupt sort of core institutions of American life. And that will be the thing that will create the internal pressure at the top that will ultimately stop the genocide and the occupation. So I think The answer is it's because we have our eyes on the prize, Josh.
Yeah, great. That's good luck with that.
I think also our at least our undergrads and our grads and many of us who have been through many more electoral cycles than we care to admit have given up on the electoral cycles, and it's not that we don't recognize that Trump is an order of awfulness different from Biden. But I think we have understood that using that I think Chris is really correct, and Maga too, that these are the demands cannot be our endpoint. The demands are our starting point. And for a far larger movement that has to carry through beyond this moment of urgency and beyond this moment of and I think that we have to, that's why I think the politics of the moment have to be clarified pretty as the movement grows, and as we it can't be predetermined in some vanguardist party sort of way. That's not I don't think that's been tried and has had its problems. So I think that I think we're trying to invent and our I'm just following our students here because they are far less you guys, you younger people are far less beholden to paradigms of action and of and so on than we are. And so marches on Washington, we did lots of marches on Washington through our lives. Josh, Philip, we've done our share of marches on Washington, and certain things changed and a lot of things didn't. And so I think I think the folks have moved on now into a new paradigm of activism. And I think it's absolutely right what Maga said, is that the demands are not our endpoint. The demands are the beginning of a far more durable and far more long-term movement, hopefully.
Yeah, I think the other thing that people have learned is that I think the difference between a liberal and the left is the liberal expects the laws to protect him or her from fascism. But fascism is all about breaking the laws and having no consequence. So the people on the left understand that the laws won't protect you. So you have to, at some point, figure out some way to come up with some kind of power that's not dependent on the laws being faithfully executed. Because as we saw in this minor situation of even universities, every fucking administration just didn't follow the rules that they wrote. And so that's the ball game, right, that we're in now.
Yeah, that's been the fundamental, when our administrators at NYU have the top administrators have refused to sit down and speak to the students or listen to them or have any dialogue with them. They sent I'm a historian of China. I call them the Gang of Four, to speak to the students, a gang of 3 or 4 administrators, mid-level, who had no authority to make any decisions whatsoever, to sort of mollify the students and so on, and then gave them deadlines that were, of course, not possible to keep. The lack of just basic humanity that the administrators have offered to the students has been for them, I guess, for the students, very eye-opening. They didn't expect this. I think they expected to be treated like human beings, and they have not been treated. They've been treated, sometimes like children, infantilized. And I mean, NYU with its ethics modules and ridiculous writing assignments and so on that that infantilize and completely depoliticize what is in fact an extraordinarily political movement. These things have been really eye-opening in ways that have galvanized even the most timid of our faculty now into trying to think about what the university has become, and what how the attacks on the universities that have been perpetrated by not only beginning with the interrogation of the elite presidents, but of others and so on. Sorry, I forgot where I began with this, but with this. But I just wanted to make the point that we have now. We have exposed, again, to make the point that we have exposed our universities so completely, and that they have really, they are emperors without clothes, and yet they still have a cudgel and the police force to try to beat us into submission. And I think there's an idea that we have to use our positions, at least as faculty, that we have to use our positions in the universities to fight back at the institutional, but also at the national and global levels. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but
I wanted to add.
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to just
ahead,
add that, yeah, like I think that we're very much like in a brave new world, for lack of a better word. Like what Rebecca was talking about reminds me of the attempts at what Chris has called like containment or pacification on our campus. We also had the day after the mob attack, before the university sent in the police, they did make an attempt to like come. They sent a mid-level administrator, the Vice Chancellor Darnell Hunt, to speak to the students, and the students were like, I was in this meeting at the encampment with hundreds of students yelling back at him like, "You're gaslighting us," which is, I'm slightly older than this generation of undergrads at this point. And I remember a time where, when a mid-level administrator came and offered, like, we'll give you a resource center, you students of color, insert, kind of cause here, that there was a layer of like leadership who was like really willing to compromise for like what felt like kind of institutional power. And what I witnessed in that day was like a dirty break with, and I this isn't the case everywhere. I know at Berkeley, people kind of took the bait. But they're like, I was laughing with someone because we were like, we're living in the era of like infographic interventions. Like someone made like a Canva like graphic that was, circulating online, where people were like, don't fall for the task force, like teaching lessons from the past. And also I think just this generation of young people in general was like, someone was saying like, not as respectful to elders, like, in a way that I think is like a part of the political consciousness of this generation, that like it's the elders who put us in this kind of position, and like this old way of doing things that has put us in the position that we're in. And so and so when like a Biden or someone, right, comes up to this generation, the Darnell Hunt example was like a microcosm of that, but like a Biden can't just come in and kind of like misinform this generation in the same way I think as has happened. I also saw people saying like, 18 to 22 I saw some discourse online saying that like 18 to 22-year-olds have been like a lot of the kind of canvassers and like the energy of the Democratic Party, at least since like the Obama era, right? Like I remember a time during the Obama election that it was like a lot of college students were like door knocking and like, getting out the vote and working the polls for Obama. I just don't see this generation having that same kind of like faith, which is scary. It's like it's exciting, but it's also scary because it's like I do think that we are in a kind of new age and new uncharted terrain. And I would say the same thing for 4811 today, right? Like our kind of willingness to experiment with outside the box kind of tactics and strategies is part of a response of like, okay, we don't really, this is uncharted territory. We might face a lot of repression, but the mask is off. And I think I wanted to add another thing that about the 48-hour kind of like battle at UCLA. I think that we're also seeing like a division within the Democratic Party, a schism of like people. There is a way in which the project of liberalism is being like tethered to fascism in this way that like there are liberals who are like, okay, we're going fully fascist, and then you have a handful of other liberals who are like, whoa, wait a second, like, am I trying to go down this road when I, waxed poetic about how terrible Trump was, and here Biden and the Democratic Party are kind of enacting very similar policies, that I think is also right an interesting and different context that just makes the idea of like the Democratic Party or like trying to make an intervention at the level of like the national election. There's a lot of kind of like these dynamic things that are happening.
Well, I think that also speaks to the fact that this movement is also really fueled by a lot of folks who may or may not be U.S. citizens, who are on our campuses. That's not a nativist remark. That's just that it has produced a global solidarity because folks are not all Americans, and we have learned about one another in really, really intimate ways now, because we've been sleeping in the camps together, and we've been taking care of one another, feeding one another, keeping each other safe, getting arrested together, and so on. These are moments that really force a certain kind of understanding of what it means to live in a global world, in a world in which the United States still, of course, wields an enormous amount of power and still is a huge imperialist entity. And of course has, huge amounts of weapons and all the rest, all the things that we know, but no longer calls the shots, exclusively. And these are lessons that we have to learn to incorporate into our practices and into our analyses, that I think are fundamentally different from a Cold War era U.S., fundamentally different from even the so-called early post-Cold War in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s. It wasn't quite post-Cold War yet, but it was, winding down. So I think we are really in a different moment, and the activisms that we see and the kind of targets that we see are no longer exclusively, aimed at the U.S. at Washington, D.C. They can't be. We live in a much more fragmented world, in a world that is, much more complex, I think. And I think that one of the things that we have to figure out, and one of the things that is really incumbent upon us as we move forward, is to fighting capital and fighting for labor rights and for labor issues and so on is a global event. It's not merely a U.S. It's not merely an American, endeavor. And so we have to think about all of these things in the context of building a movement now that I think we have really laid some really great foundations for. In large part because the students, undergrad and grad, have been so fantastically inventive and persistent and marvelous about really, standing up for what they believe in.
Boy, I think that's a good way to end on that kind of praise elegy for the students.
I didn't mean to end it all there.
No, but I think it's a good way to go out. I was going to make an intervention saying it's too bad Biden's foreign policy team is nostalgic for Cold War liberalism, but that would just depress us all if we talked about it. So let's go out on your way, that the younger people are the pioneers, leading us into directions that we couldn't take, but that we salute you all and follow your adventures eagerly. The way others follow TV shows. We follow your exploits.
Let me add to what you've said, Philip. Let me add to what you've said, which is, Maga, you were talking about how your group of dissidents has to find a way to go beyond what the union is willing to do because they're more conservative and perhaps tied to the Democratic Party. Who knows? Chris, you've been disappointed by what happened in Berkeley, but see possibilities for building the union movement as a strong center for a more robust protest. And Rebecca, you have plans for the summer to build and expand and not get tied up into Democratic versus Republican politics, but basically sort of to try and find a third way. That's true. What happened in 1968?
Can't use that word, John.
Third ways,
Another way. Excuse me.
Another way is fine.
Another way.
Third way you can't do.
Not that third way, anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a disenchantment with the way in which our political economy and society is organized, and the structures that exist aren't allowing for the kinds of protests which are necessary on the campus now. Finding a alternative to the existing structure is a really difficult and long haul. And it's something which I thought we started back in '68, and then we got derailed by, and maybe this is too simplistic, but derailed by the Weathermen, and what SDS could have become as an alternative did not. And I was, it's been a huge disappointment to have the movement that we started with fade away. And I don't, but what you're all saying is that there's a new world, there's a new movement, there's a new possibility that's building, and there's lots of new possibilities. So that's fabulous. It's wonderful. And I wish you all, like I did with Chris, I wish you all well in exploring that and promoting it.
Oh, but one other thing is there were kind of new fruits and shoots and possibilities that shot up immediately in the aftermath of the takeovers and so forth. When faculty members came out and sat on the lawn and would give these impromptu classes, classes were canceled right after the bus, but for the rest of the year, the faculty kept inventing new ways to get together and talk to the students, not in the classrooms and not even on the university sometimes, but in apartments downtown. And it was really cool because a lot of people felt, oh my God, this is the real university, the one that's starting to take place, which is just faculty and students and no registrars and shit like that that's going on. So maybe things like that will start to happen side by side with the organization that takes place. There will be, the friends who opened up a Marxist summer camp on the West Coast. I mean, I think those things are very important. And I hope to see
sort of like Red May. Congratulations, Philip.
Sort of like Red May. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maga. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Rebecca. Enjoy your trip to Hong Kong. And is it Hong Kong and Taiwan? Yeah, okay. And Josh, my friend,
We'll be in touch.
we'll enjoy our waning years together and stay in touch.
Not
As
raining.
always, thank you, Philip, and thank you. That what this movement has done has really introduced me to so many wonderful people, and I that's been a real it has made these very, very devastating months very endurable because of all of the great people I have met in the process of organizing. So thank you again.
That's great.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay, Mahim, I think we're ready to go